Have you ever met someone who runs just when things start to feel real? I'm talking about the person who says, I've never felt this way before, but the second it gets too close, poof, they're gone. Not because you did something wrong, but because suddenly you mattered too much. This is what happens when an avoidant finally realizes you're the one. When you're dealing with someone who has avoidant attachment tendencies, it's easy to take their distance personally. You feel the connection, you see the potential. Maybe you even hear them say things like, I've never met anyone like you, or you make me feel safe. But then suddenly they pull away, they stop texting, they cancel plans, they create space where closeness used to be. It feels like a slap in the face, like rejection, like they changed their mind. But here's the truth most people don't understand. They're not afraid of you, they're afraid of what you make them feel. Avoidants often grow up in environments where love was inconsistent, conditional, or overwhelming. Somewhere along the line, they learned a survival strategy. Don't get too close, don't rely on anyone, keep people at arm's length so you don't get hurt. So when you come along, kind, steady, emotionally available, you don't feel like a dream come true. You feel like a threat to the system they've used to survive. You represent closeness, vulnerability, the possibility of being truly seen, and that is terrifying to someone who associates intimacy with pain, loss, or loss of control. When someone avoidant starts to feel that emotional intensity, that this could be real moment, their instincts kick in. The walls go up. It's like their nervous system throws a red flag, danger, too close, retreat. They might even be aware they're doing it but feel powerless to stop it. You might notice them getting quiet after a great date, pulling away right after a vulnerable conversation, creating distance, not because something went wrong, but because everything finally felt right, and right feels unfamiliar. This is the part that confuses people the most. In most healthy relationships, deepening connection brings people closer. But with avoidance, the exact moment they start to feel something real is often when they start pulling away. Backwards logic. But not if you understand the fear that's driving them. Emotional intimacy for them is like stepping onto unstable ground. Their instincts are telling them to run, even while their heart might be whispering. This is why you can't take their distance as a reflection of your worth. That pullback isn't proof that you weren't enough. In fact, it's often proof that you meant something, that you were getting close to a part of them they usually keep hidden, even from themselves. You didn't trigger their detachment because you were wrong for them. You triggered it because you touched something they didn't know how to handle. And yes, that's painful because it creates a push-pull dynamic that leaves you confused. You may be trying to analyze every detail, replaying every conversation, wondering what you did, but the truth is their fear response is about their own internal wiring. It's about their past, their beliefs, their defense mechanisms, and if you're not careful, you'll start trying to fix it by overgiving, over-explaining, or shrinking yourself to be more digestible. That's the trap. Realizing that avoidants don't fear you. They fear vulnerability. Can shift everything. It gives you clarity. It helps you detach from the shame spiral and reframe what's really going on. You didn't do something wrong by being emotionally available. You didn't push them away by loving too much. You simply showed up with a kind of energy they weren't used to, and that energy lit up every alarm bell in their nervous system. The question then becomes, will they do the work to calm those alarms and lean in, or will they continue running from the very thing they've always said they wanted? That part is not up to you. But understanding that their fear is not a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of how deep your presence goes, is the first step in reclaiming your power. When someone with avoidant tendencies starts to pull away, most people assume something has gone wrong. It feels like a sudden shift. Things were going well, the connection felt real, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, they become distant. They fade away. The warmth cools, the communication slows down, the vulnerability disappears. But what if that pullback isn't a sign that the connection is fading, What if it's a sign that you've actually struck something real? Avoidant individuals are not necessarily cold or incapable of love. In fact, many of them deeply crave intimacy. They just don't know how to regulate the emotions that come with it. For them, closeness isn't comforting right away. It's triggering. It stirs up emotions they've spent years trying to keep buried: fear of abandonment, fear of losing themselves, fear of being hurt. When you come into their life and create a genuine connection, something deep, stable, and emotionally present, it can feel overwhelming, not because it's bad, but because it's foreign. In the early stages of a relationship, things can feel safe for an avoidant person because they're still operating on the surface. There's attraction, excitement, maybe even affection, but it's not yet emotionally real in the way that exposes their inner vulnerabilities. They feel in control. As the relationship deepens and the emotional stakes get higher, that illusion of control starts to slip. The more they start to care, the more the threat of loss becomes real, and that's when they start pulling back. Not because they don't care, but because they do. It's a strange paradox. Most people expect that when someone realizes they're falling in love, they'll move closer. But for someone avoidant, that realization often creates an internal crisis. Suddenly, they're not just spending time with you, they're starting to need you emotionally. They're starting to feel safe in ways they haven't before, and that safety brings old fears to the surface. What if I lose this? What if I can't handle this? What if I get hurt? These are questions they don't know how to answer, so instead of facing them, they retreat. The emotional intensity of real connection can feel like too much for someone who has spent their life trying to protect themselves from it. It's not that they don't want the relationship, it's that they don't know how to stay in it without feeling like they're losing their defenses. So they do what they've always done. They create space, they back off, they might say they're busy, they might act cold, they might even convince themselves that maybe this isn't the right fit. But deep down, they know something important just happened. You touched something they weren't ready to face. What this means for you is important. When they start to pull back, it's not necessarily because you've made a mistake. It's not always a reflection of incompatibility. In fact, it might be a sign that the relationship just crossed into emotional territory that matters. It's uncomfortable. Yes, but it's also incredibly revealing. You've reached a depth that many people never access, and in that moment, the avoidant person is forced to confront something they've spent their whole life avoiding. The reality that real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires risk. This is the fork in the road. Some avoidants will push past that discomfort and lean in. Others will let fear take the wheel and retreat. But if you misunderstand their pullback as disinterest, you may blame yourself and start changing your behavior in response, overgiving, over-explaining, or trying to chase what you already had. That only reinforces the cycle. Instead, recognizing that the distance might actually mean you've struck a nerve, one connected to love, not rejection, can help you stay grounded. You didn't do anything wrong by getting close. You just got real, and sometimes real is exactly what shakes someone to their core. When you're in a relationship with someone who has avoidant tendencies, it can feel like walking a tightrope. One minute, they're present, open, and even affectionate. The next, they're distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. This push-pull dynamic can make you feel like you have to adjust yourself constantly to keep things going. You may start believing that if you just say the right thing, stay calm enough, become less needy, or prove your love harder, they'll finally feel safe enough to stay close. But here's what's crucial to understand. No amount of shrinking yourself will fix someone else's emotional unavailability. When avoidants start to feel overwhelmed by intimacy, they usually don't communicate it clearly. Instead, they might create distance by becoming less responsive, emotionally withdrawing, or even subtly criticizing the relationship. This triggers something in the person who cares about them, especially if you're someone who tends to be more emotionally available or anxious. It makes you want to close the gap, so you try harder. You send more messages, you ask if they're okay, you try to prove that you're safe, supportive, and not like the others. But every time you do this from a place of fear, you reinforce a dangerous pattern that your worth is tied to their comfort. Over time, this dynamic teaches you to make yourself smaller. You stop expressing your needs because you're afraid they'll retreat further. You avoid certain conversations, not because you don't care, but because you don't want to trigger their discomfort. You become hyper aware of their moods, walking on eggshells and managing their emotions more than your own. You shapeshift, shrink, and suppress your own emotional reality in an effort to maintain connection. And while you might temporarily keep the relationship alive, you lose yourself in the process. What makes this especially hard is that your efforts often come from love. You see their potential, you recognize the wounded parts of them, you want to be the person who finally makes them feel safe. But you can't love someone into healing. You can't fill the space they're unwilling to meet you in. Emotional closeness has to be mutual, and it cannot be sustained by one person doing all the emotional labor. People with avoidant attachment don't need someone to bend over backwards for them. They need to learn how to sit with discomfort, confront their fears of intimacy, and take responsibility for their own triggers. And that only happens when they're given the space to grow. If you keep over-functioning in the relationship, you're not just abandoning yourself, you're also robbing them of the opportunity to rise to the occasion. You're taking on their share of the work, and that creates imbalance, resentment, and eventual burnout. So what's the alternative? You stay grounded in your own emotional truth. You hold your boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. You communicate openly without demanding closeness, and you allow them the space to choose connection or not. That's where your power is, not in trying to become someone more palatable, but in standing firm in who you are, even when it tests the relationship. At the core, healthy love doesn't require you to shrink. It doesn't ask you to ignore your needs to protect someone else's fear. The right relationship will challenge you to grow, yes, but it won't force you to become less of yourself to maintain peace. You are not too much. You are not asking for too much. And if your presence, your truth, or your emotional availability makes someone uncomfortable, that discomfort is their responsibility to manage, not yours to absorb. Trying to heal someone by abandoning yourself isn't love. It's self-sacrifice. And real connection can only happen when both people are showing up as their full selves, not versions they've contorted into just to survive the relationship. There's a common belief that if someone realizes you're the one, they'll automatically step up, lean in, and choose the relationship without hesitation. That once they see your worth, they'll fight to keep you. It's a comforting idea, especially when you're in love with someone who has avoidant tendencies. You want to believe that your presence, your patience, your love will be enough to break through their walls. But here's the truth. Even if an avoidant person recognizes your value, it doesn't guarantee they'll choose you. Knowing you're the one and being ready to handle what that means are two very different things. For an avoidant, realizing you're the one doesn't always come with joy. It can come with panic. It means there's something real at stake, real love, real vulnerability, and real loss if things go wrong. That realization doesn't always bring clarity. Sometimes it brings chaos. It activates old wounds, unresolved trauma, and deep-rooted fears of dependence and abandonment. Instead of inspiring commitment, it can cause them to shut down because real love for someone who fears closeness doesn't feel safe at first. It feels like surrendering control, and surrender is something they've spent their entire life resisting. This is what makes being involved with an avoidant so painful. You can feel the connection. You can sense that they care. They might even say it. They might tell you that you're unlike anyone they've ever met, that they feel things with you they've never felt before. But words mean very little without action. They might know you're special. They might know you bring something good into their life. But if they're not willing or able to do the inner work required to be in a healthy, emotionally available relationship, that knowledge won't change the outcome. You can be someone's ideal partner and still not be chosen because choosing someone takes courage. It requires vulnerability, accountability, and emotional maturity. And if someone is still operating from fear, no amount of love or reassurance from you will push them to make that leap. They have to want it for themselves. They have to face their fear of intimacy, examine their beliefs about relationships, and learn to sit with emotional discomfort instead of running from it. That's a process that only they can commit to. It's incredibly hard to watch someone walk away, not because they don't care, but because they can't handle what caring brings up in them. It can make you feel powerless, like love wasn't enough. But here's the most important thing to understand. This is not a reflection of your value. It's not proof that you failed or weren't good enough. It's a reflection of where they are in their emotional journey. You could be everything they ever wanted, and if they're still ruled by fear, they'll find a way to sabotage it. That's why it's so critical not to tie your self-worth to whether or not they choose you. Love is not supposed to be a rescue mission. You are not here to convince someone of your worth. You are here to stand fully in your own truth and allow others to meet you there or not. If they're not ready, it's not your job to wait indefinitely or shrink your needs to keep the connection alive. You deserve someone who doesn't just recognize your value, but is willing to act on it. Someone who doesn't let fear win. It's easy to romanticize being the one for someone, especially when the connection feels rare. But love isn't just about potential. It's about participation. It's about two people actively choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So if they're not choosing you, let that be the answer, not because you weren't worth it, but because they weren't ready. And readiness matters just as much as love. When you care deeply for someone, especially someone who struggles with emotional closeness, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that love means waiting, fixing, or proving your worth. You might start believing that if you're just patient enough, calm enough, selfless enough, they'll eventually recognize what they have in you and choose the relationship fully. But the truth is, your power doesn't lie in being chosen by someone else. It lies in choosing yourself first. And always. In relationships with avoidant individuals, it's common to feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster. One moment, they're present and affectionate. The next, they're withdrawn and unresponsive. You find yourself trying to decode every signal, wondering what you did wrong, questioning your tone, your words, your needs. Over time, you may start adjusting who you are just to hold on to the connection. You silence your feelings so you don't scare them away. You downplay your needs to seem easier to love, and bit by bit, without even realizing it, you start fading from your own life. But here's the hard truth. Abandoning yourself is not the way to secure love. If anything, it teaches your nervous system that your needs don't matter, that peace only comes when someone else is comfortable, that your role is to manage the relationship instead of experiencing it fully. And this doesn't just harm your emotional well-being, it chips away at your self-respect. Because every time you quiet your truth to keep someone else around, you're reinforcing the idea that their comfort is more important than your authenticity. Choosing yourself isn't about being selfish. It's about recognizing that your emotional health, peace, and sense of self are not optional in love. They're essential. Real intimacy requires two whole people coming together, not one person shrinking to fit into the emotional gaps of another. When you prioritize your emotional needs, set healthy boundaries, and speak your truth, even if it's uncomfortable, you create a foundation for real, grounded connection. And if someone walks away because of that, let them, because the alternative is losing yourself to stay in something that isn't mutual. It's incredibly painful to realize that someone who says you're the one still won't choose to show up for you. But love without action isn't enough. Words without commitment aren't enough. You deserve to be loved in a way that is active, open, consistent, and reciprocal. And if you're not getting that, you are allowed to walk away. Not as a punishment to them, but as a declaration to yourself that you will no longer settle for partial love. The moment you start choosing yourself is the moment everything changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop molding yourself to fit into someone else's fear. You start standing in your truth, even if that means standing alone for a while. That's not weakness, that's power. It's strength to look at a situation, even one filled with love and potential, and say, this isn't enough if I have to disappear to keep it. That decision is what creates space for real, aligned love to find you. When you choose yourself, something powerful happens. You stop attracting people who only want pieces of you. You start becoming unavailable to anything less than mutual respect and emotional safety. You shift from waiting to be chosen to choosing with clarity. And the people who are capable of showing up for real love, they will feel that energy, because when you hold your own heart with confidence, you invite others to meet you on equal ground. In the end, love that costs you your self-worth isn't love. It's survival, and you weren't born to survive relationships. You were born to thrive in them. That starts when you stop begging to be chosen and start showing up for yourself.